I'm Maria Balshaw, in case anyone doesn't know who I am. I'm director here at the gallery, and we are in our grand hall for the inaugural lecture by Cornelia Parker, who is honorary professor and visiting Pilkington professor at the University of Manchester, of which the Whitworth is a part. That professorship has been made possible by our fantastic colleagues in the schools of arts, languages and cultures, and we're hugely grateful to them because we could have sold out tonight's event 3 times over, quite honestly. When the gallery posted a notice about the lecture on Facebook, the first tranche of tickets sold out in a couple of hours. But it's fine that we could have sold it out 3 times over because we are going to have Cornelia with us for 3 years. It won't all be lectures and talks. There'll be a whole series of explorations and investigations which will, I hope, contribute to Cornelia's practice and to the greater sum of knowledge across our university and our city. It's been a tremendous honour working with Cornelia as the inaugural artist in our newly restored exhibition galleries. It's really difficult as a gallery director ever to single out one artwork that changed your life. You know, it's the question that journalists always ask and is impossible to answer, except in this case, which is that I can say quite honestly that seeing Cold Dark Matter when I was 21 genuinely did change my life and the way that I thought about art and culture. And I think the simplest way of understanding that is that until that point, all the paintings and artworks that I'd seen either sat on plinths or had frames around them. And I walked into the Chisenhale Gallery and saw an exploded shed and thought, that is what I want to know more about. So Cornelia came immediately to mind when we started our curatorial conversations about the artists we would like to work with us to make the first impression on new spaces. And Cornelia has worked with us through climbing up scaffolding and standing in freezing cold with no roof, and to gradually beginning to appreciate how marvellous the exhibition spaces would look with Cornelia's work in it. She has been a collaborator, not just with us as the gallery, but with colleagues across the university. And she's wanted that kind of dialogue with scientists like Kostya Novoselov, with colleagues in the history of art, in material sciences, a very wide range of conversations. And I'm pleased to say this is only the beginning, because the honorary professor role means that Cornelia can seek out what she needs within a university art gallery context and a campus. So all the knowledge that is held here is there for her to engage with. And she will be available for us. And that feels an absolute pleasure and an honour in Manchester. Since we opened the doors on February the 14th, we've had now almost 150,000 visitors. We have had some of the most remarkable reviews any arts organisation has seen ever, and Cornelia's had some of the best reviews of her career. Very well deserved. You will all have seen the exhibition. It works tremendously in the spaces because Cornelia's thought and spirit comes through, and it has met the spirit of the Whitworth. So with no further ado, I wanted to hand over to Cornelia Parker, an internationally important artist, but also now a friend of Manchester.
Well, thank you, Marie. I mean, it's a tough act to follow, but it's been great the last 2 years that I've spent working on the show. So this talk is mostly about the show, really, and some of the process that went into it. And this title, which is Truth to Materials, is something that I like exploring as a phrase, because when I was a student at Wolverhampton Poly in the 70s, Odette and 2 rows back was a mature student at the college at the same time as me, so we go back 40 years, don't we? But I remember being taught when I was doing sculpture that this mantra, truth to materials, which I think had been used many times, but Henry Moore particularly used it when he talked about carving wood or stone. It was like going with the grain or going against the grain. It was like bringing out the best in the material or seeing what the potential of the material was and going with it. So my truth to materials is, I think, quite different from his, but I think that's something to keep in mind when you watching the slides. So I'm just going to show you, for those of you who don't know anything about my background, I studied fine art at Wolverhampton Poly and then went and did an MA at Reading University, which I finished in '82. And then really the work I've made a couple of years after that, in 1984, 85, I think things started to change, and I think the work started to make sense to me for the first time. This piece was because I missed all the induction courses when I was at college, sculpture induction courses, because I thought I was a painter. I went there as a painter, and for some reason didn't manage to do any of I didn't want to learn to carve or model. I didn't like art that sat on plinths. I sort of rejected all that, so I thought I wanted to paint. But I think it was halfway through my degree that I realised really I was a sculptor. And had been brought up in a small holding, doing lots of manual labour with my hands for many years. I realised there was a choreography that needed to come out. So the process you just saw, the steamroller running over the silver plate, that's the end of 1988, and it was an exhibition I had at the Icon Gallery in 1989, and it was called 30 Pieces of Silver, and this is the piece now. And for me, that was the first time I made a very large-scale work. There's another view of it. And for a long time I didn't squash anything. The steamroller was only 10 tons and it broke up the silver, and it was all very cheap silver plate. I think I bought the whole lot for about £500, all the silver plate. And then years later, when I did a piece of work for the V&A in 2001, I went back to squashing, and I squashed a brass band, which is in the V&A now. And my squashing bug came back. Trouble is, I didn't want to squash. I mean, the squashing I did before didn't interest me. I wanted to do hardcore squashing, so I found a 250-ton press in a metalworks, and they made a jig for me so I could squash things, really flat. So this piece here is one of those pieces, which is tarnishing nicely in the galleries. So this piece was called Composition with Horns, and then brackets, double flat. I like a good pun. I like the idea that these are wind instruments. They've had many, many breaths, throughout their life. I bought all these from. They were defunct, they'd been sold for scrap, really, and so rather than end up on a pub ceiling, I thought that they might be nice, suspended just above the floor. And the idea of things just hovering just above the floor, it's almost like I'd robbed them of their volume, so I wanted to give them back an equivalent volume. So it was, after killing them off, I sort of resurrected them again. So these works I've made over the years, many things I've destroyed, really, things that are coming to the end of their life anyway, and then by killing them off, I want to reinvest them with a life as an artwork instead. This is a piece I made last year with a glass foundry in Venice, and this piece is called Decoy, and it's a glass drum, so if you played it, it would just shatter. So I like the idea of, after the squashed musical instruments, the idea of a marching drum being this fragile thing. So I think that they have, so they're close to each other in the show. So the show I've mixed up things from different years. There's quite a lot of new work in the show, but there's work is going right back to the shed, which was done in 1991. This is one of my favourite artists. This is Duchamp, very mischievously draped a mile of string over a surrealist exhibition in New York in 1942, and which meant nobody else's work got seen by the public. He didn't even turn up to the opening. He just draped this and left. I think he hired some children to play as well, playing ball in the show. So pissed everybody off. But I loved it as an installation. I thought it's great. And I always wanted to do a piece with a mile of string. And in 2003, I was in a Triennale at the Tate, and I asked them very cheekily if I could borrow Rodin's The Kiss, because I love Rodin, and I think The Kiss was one of my favourite sculptures when I was at school. And the idea, but somehow it seemed too perfect. It seemed to be about romantic love, and we all know love's not quite that, straightforward. And so I thought I'd make a little bit of a complication with it, just for a very brief period for this exhibition. So with the conservation department at the Tate, I draped it with this mile of string, Duchamp's mile of string. So their lives overlapped, and they were not quite, making their careers exactly the same time, but they weren't that far apart, but had very different views of what art could be. So one was very retinal, Rodin, and then Duchamp was more about concept. So I like this idea of this measurement, this mile. And so I called this piece, instead of The Kiss, I called it The Distance, which was the opposite of The Kiss. And in brackets I put a kiss with string attached. So it was adding that bit of complication into love, which we all know is there. But there was an artist organisation called the Stuckists, who are artists who think that art should be like it was in, 100 years ago. And so they had a mock seminar around my piece, about 30 of them, and one of them had a big pair of shears, and they cut all the string off. And I thought, what would Duchamp do? So I knotted it all back together again and put it back on the sculpture, which made it a lot more sort of punk looking. The mile of string that got cut, which was in, over 10 years ago now, is in the exhibition here. And I was invited to be in a show last year about Duchamp as kind of contemporary response. So I wrapped it around a weapon. So I used, this piece is called The Distance, and in brackets with concealed weapon. So instead of the kiss inside it, it has a weapon. I'm not going to tell you what the weapon is, but it could kill you. And then you see that before you go into the show, and then the Tate were very kind enough to lend me the kiss again. So these are photographs I took a couple of years ago of statues in the City of London on Threadneedle Street, the corner of Bishopsgate and Threadneedle Street. And all these statues were on top of what was the Bank of England for a while. And it became NatWest Bank, and now it's just used for weddings, I think. Anyway, it's a no longer used bank, a defunct bank. And there's all these statues on the top, which are all representing industry from all over the country. But somehow they were being covered in netting to stop the masonry falling. And somehow it seemed a bit metaphoric for what was happening with industry and, the crash and the bankers' crisis and everything. So I took these photographs with a telephoto lens. Again, they're statues imprisoned, a bit like the Kiss. And the grime that's accumulated on them over the years, and I like them very much. There was one at Manchester, which is the only one I didn't photograph because it's right around the back of the building and I couldn't get access to it, so that's a shame. This piece is also in that room, and this is photographs I took a couple of years ago on my iPhone of Pentonville Prison. So when I was walking past the prison, which I did every day, I noticed all these cracks in the prison wall being repaired by decorators. And I thought, wow, they look like abstract expressionist paintings. So I thought, I must come back with a good camera and photograph it. I never managed to do it because I was walking past one day and they were painting them out with magnolia paint, which is what the top is. So I just took my iPhone out and I went, I took all these photographs, and then that was it. And then I decided I was going to make a piece of work, and this is called Prison Wall Abstracts, A Man Escaped. because later on, 2 hours later, a man escaped over the wall from the prison. He was the reason he was in prison was because he shot somebody with a sawn-off shotgun, which we'll pick up in a minute. I've been working on a piece which I'm just about to open at the British Library in London in mid-May, which is, I've been commissioned to make a response to the Magna Carta, so for the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta, by the British Library and by Ruskin, part of Oxford University. And so my response to it was to say I was going to make an embroidery of the Wikipedia page of the Magna Carta, because when I've always loved encyclopedias, and I particularly love Wikipedia because it's, you know, I've got lots of old encyclopedias written in the 30s, which, you know, when you read some of the British history, you think, oh, this is, you know, very British Empire, and it's not correct, and, you know, you feel like history is always being written by the victors, and Wikipedia is such a great democratic thing, you know, that people, lots of experts and lots of non-experts add their penny's worth. So it's not the Oxford English Dictionary, but it's most probably more accurate to life, because it's a shifting thing, it's always moving around. So for that piece, which is 13 metres long and 1.5 metres across, it's been embroidered by 200 people. Quite a lot of those people, about 33 of them, are prisoners in jail, who the Magna Carta has obviously been very instrumental in our, you know, our judiciary and our legal system, and everybody being equal under the law, and the American Constitution, and you know, Bill of Rights, all those things have come from the Magna Carta. So the prisoners have been through a charity organisation called Find Cell Work, volunteers who work with prisoners to teach them how to embroider. And some of the best embroiderers in prison are the people who've been there the longest. So the longest, you know, so the Wikipedia page is full of long sentences. So they have, you know, done all the text of the embroidery, and all the images on the piece have been made by members of the Embroiderers Guild. So lots of skilled embroiderers all over the country. So anyway, I was asked them, a few of the prisoners I'd sort of got to know through letters and through knowing what expert stitchers they were. And what I loved so much about what they did was that I loved the backs of their work, because that was almost like written in a foreign language, and it was they hadn't cared about the back because it was the front that mattered. And so I asked them if they could embroider some these are excerpts out of Chambers Dictionary definitions. So this one, what is this one? This is love and hate, obviously. And so that these two paragraphs are face to face, so they embroidered backwards into the fabric. So the fabric is getting the front of them. So hate is being embroidered from behind, and love is embroidered the other way around. So you can't, you know, so the thing on top you can't quite read because it's backwards, and the one underneath you can read, but it's the back of the stitch. Trouble is, they were all too neat, even though I'd written to them and said, we'd love you to not worry about, you know, whatever side you're embroidering, don't think about the other side. I didn't have enough time to send them to, you know, to 2 different stitches in 2 different jails because I was running out of time. But I still think what they've done is incredible. It's too legible. Hate is a little bit more legible than it should be, but I like the merging of these two things, so you read them simultaneously, but you're hampered in your reading of both of them. And some, you know, I like this one particularly because this person actually took it on board, you know, more. But life and death, you know, good and evil, love and hate, all these things are things we all grapple with all the time. So love and hate embroidery is the closest to the kiss piece in the show. Conscious and unconscious. So these are all themes really that I work with in my work. And talking about words, this is a piece I made in 19 96, I think. It's called The Negative of Words, and it's little bits of silver that are engraved. An engraver who hand engraves into silver and gold. He'd keep all the tiny tendrils of gold because they were worth something, but the silver, it wasn't worth much, so he'd throw it away. So I asked him if he could start saving it for me. So it took him a long time to build up this pile. There's a couple of years' worth of engraving there, but I really like the fact that the things you engrave into silver or gold are usually monumental words. You don't engrave or swear words or whatever. You just, it's all commemorative stuff, really. So if that was commemorative, the inverse of commemoration, what is it? So the idea of it being literally the negative of words. A lot of my work is quite literal, or literary, but literal. So you really are looking at the negative of words. He told me a lovely story about gold, that he used to work way back when Brylcreem was in fashion. Workers would run their fingers through their hair and get little specks of gold in their hair, and then they'd comb it out when they got home and keep it in a jar, and that would be their holiday fund. This is called The Collected Death of Images, which is a sheet of silver made for me by a man in a garage who reclaimed silver from photographic fix. So it really is all the lost positives. So instead of the negatives, it's the positives. I mean, that's becoming less and less now because we've gone digital. But I also love this mantra in Clerkenwell, where there was a lot of photographic processing going on, that they say that the drains there are lined with silver because of all the chemicals that went down. This is a bullet drawing. I've made there's quite a few bullet drawings on the show, and over the years I've been making objects, melting objects down and having them made into wire, and that process is called drawing, so it's a technical term, but you're actually drawing the metal, you're stretching it through a draw plate which has diminishing size holes, so you keep on pulling it through until it's the length you want it to be. So I got a large quantity of bullets of different types melted down, and by two different factories. One melted them down and made them into a thick rope. Then I took it to another factory who drew them down into various gauges. And then I took a Magnum 44, the weight of a Magnum 44 bullet, which there were some in the mix, to measure off the length of wire to make a drawing with. So these are all made of bullets, but they're lots of bullets, but a weight of lead from it. So this one, I originally made a piece like this 3 years ago in Jerusalem as part of an exhibition I was in called the Jerusalem Show. And I used 12 nails and a bullet, and it felt very much more pertinent to Jerusalem and what was happening there at the time. I was brought up a Catholic, now lapsed, so the 12 nails somehow seemed to be like, almost like the stages of the cross or something. So here I called it 12 nails and a bullet. It's become a different piece. These are, I don't really do self-portraits. The work I make is not necessarily about me, although it's always bound to be about you. But I decided in this show that somehow there was a lot of violence, a lot of blood and guts going down, but I thought it'd be quite nice to have something visceral in the show, which is quite controlled. So I might get a bullet to go around a corner, for example. So the trajectory of the bullet usually carries on until it hits something. But if you can make it turn corners and snap to a grid, I thought that was interesting. So the idea of taking my own blood and trying to make a perfect square, a perfect circle, triangle, a line. That line started to look like the letter I. I went to my doctor in London and asked him if he would allow, me to have some of my own blood, like a vial, because they have they take blood there. They have a nurse there all the time, and I've given 7 pints of blood for other people and various samples over the years, and he was horrified. He just said he couldn't think of anything worse. And I said, well, if I was asking it for science, would you refuse me then? You must be giving me straight away. I've given lots of blood away for all various things, but all I'm asking is a bit of my own blood. I don't want to have to cut my finger to draw blood. And he goes, you mean you'll self-harm to get... We thought mad artist, you know. And I thought, oh, okay. So, so I came up to Manchester and we found a GP within seconds who said, they're very squeamish down south, that's what I think. So, but it was kind of a bit icky doing something with your own blood. But anyway. I think perhaps I got this idea perhaps from seeing the gravestone of Patrick Corfield, you know, the great artist. He's buried in Highgate Cemetery, and he's designed his own gravestone, and it's got a ziggurat that goes down like this. And he's used these shapes, you know, like a half circle, and made them. And it says D-E-A-D, dead. And I saw this grave, I just burst out laughing. It was a beautiful piece of modernism, and I just thought, wow, that's really funny. So this is my homage to him. This is a photograph I took on the top of the Mount of Olives of you know, the kind of plaque you have to show you where famous things are in the city. So this was all smashed up, covered in chewing gum. And I was, you know, the view from the top of the Mount of Olives is this view, but you look down at this photographic representation, I think it's ceramic, and I thought I'd take a photograph of that. So it's called Broken View. I mean, I'm very obsessed with cracks, as you might have noticed. This is an image I took also in Jerusalem. This is in the courtyard of the Holy Sepulchre, which has got a beautiful courtyard. And there was this thing, which was a bomb disposal container, which, you know, you'd put suspect packages in it if they thought it was a bomb. And it was beautifully rusted. And I just took lots of photographs of tiny bits of rust, and this is one of them. And I thought it was quite portentous. And it was called a cloudburst. And the reason I was taking all these little things is when in Jerusalem there's supposed to be this syndrome called Jerusalem syndrome, which is where people get very over-religious and start to see the face of Christ in you know, coffee grounds, or every stain on the street becomes something portentous. So I started to find my own obsession with various stains around the city. And this is oil stain in Bethlehem and spilt milk in Jerusalem. So these are just things I came across. But I love the way the liquids would fill in the cracks in the pavement. And something, I've got lots of photographs. I've got melted lollies going into cracks. I've got all kinds of photographs taken over the years. So this spawns the two bronze pieces in the show. This is the cracks in a pavement, a path that runs through Bunhill Fields in London, which is where William Blake is buried. And what I did was get this cold cure rubber, which a two-part rubber that you mix together, and when you mix it together, it sets. So me and my assistant would squeeze it into the cracks of the pavement, and then pull it up afterwards. And so you've got this rubber mould, which then you take to the foundry and they make it into bronze. I like the idea of deifying the cracks. If I was going to have to make bronze, which I've never really done before, I thought, well, you know, a bronze crack, I can live with that. I also think of it as a kind of line drawing, really. So it's a filigree bronze, and it sits on the floor rather than on a plinth. This is me in Jerusalem. I'm on my hands and knees at midnight taking a cast of cracks in the pavement, in a beautiful marble pavement in Jerusalem, just outside the old city walls in East Jerusalem, and then pulling up the rubber, and then bringing Jerusalem back to Manchester. So Jerusalem is literally in Manchester now, in the site of the Satanic Mills, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and everything, and Blake's wonderful poetry, and his idea of Jerusalem, which is very different from the Jerusalem that is there today. So this is another kind of literal thing that I literally brought Jerusalem back, and it sits here. I love Blake's poetry, possibly more than I like his artwork, actually. I really, something about it that really speaks to me. This is my most well-known work, which I'm very pleased, Maria, that you responded to it. I remember, when I made this piece in 1991, the idea of the explosion was very much literally in the air, because there was a threat of IRA bombs going off in London at the time. You know, my mother was German, and she was, you know, had been a nurse in the Second World War, and had seen quite a lot of horror, and she was a prisoner of war at the end of the war, and she came over to Britain as an au pair and met my father. But she, you know, there was quite a lot of trauma there that she vaguely talked about, but, you know, about fires and uncontrollable things. And my grandfather, my British grandfather, was in the trenches, so he had lots of explosion stories. Somehow explosions were very much there, and they are in all our lives. We see them on the news every day, and we, day in, day out, year in, year out, there's explosions going on. Whether it's in, you know, popular culture, in the movies and cartoons, or on the news. So I thought, well, I've heard explosions go off. I haven't ever walked through, you know, I've never picked up a piece of shrapnel from an explosion. And so I really thought I'd like to, you know, because this is an ongoing series of works which, taking things that are ubiquitous and well-known, ordinary, almost cliche. So the garden shed is a bit of a cliche, you know, it's a place where you put all your stuff you don't want to throw away. It's almost like the attic. And so I was asked to make this piece for Chisenhale Gallery in East London. And it was a black box with no natural light. So I thought, well, I'm going to start off with a light source. And then from that came the explosion. And this is the garden shed inside. This is the garden shed inside the gallery with its light on inside, with all the objects in it. All the objects I'd got from various friends' garages and sheds. I bought stuff from car boot sales, which was all the contents of sheds. You know, lots of stuff there that I know very well. And then I thought, well, I really need sponsorship because I can't blow it up because I haven't got the expertise, obviously. And so thinking of all the kinds of people who could help me blow it up, from explosive experts, special effects people, demolition people, and then the British Army. And the British Army, somehow, with the whole troubles in Ireland and, you know, the Falklands War and a lot of stuff about that at the time that really sort of made me feel that somebody said, oh, you can't use the British Army, you can't be sponsored by the British Army. Which I thought, why not? And I thought of sponsorship, which is still very much part of art, but was quite a new concept then. The idea you couldn't be sponsored by BP or, you know, Barclays Bank or whoever because of the political connotations. Well, I thought, well, perhaps that's part of the work, you know, perhaps that should be, you know, part of everything I do because it's a part of our you know, our lives. So I went to the British Army and asked them if they'd help me blow up the shed, which they were very happy to do. And in fact, there was a whole load of Kenyan soldiers there that day, and one of the majors said, yes, this is what we British do. This is a ritual. We blow up garden sheds and, you know, so it sort of spun this whole yarn to them about this is what, you know, this is, you know, almost like a Japanese tea ceremony or something. And all these bits went all over the place. In fact, there's bits that went so far we never found them, like this whole, you know, the handlebars on the bike just went fields away, and I had this horrible vision of them impaling some poor cow or something. And then here it is, you know, 24 years later, and it's like a time capsule. I realised the stuff in the shed then, some of it was current, and some of it, there's even a can of Coke in there from one of the guys in the army that's in the piece, and also a little bit of debris from the Army School of Ammunition. There was a little bit of a bomb or something in there that I just picked up thinking it was part of the shed. But it also got curlers and, you know, all sorts of stuff that, some of them were quite old. And also a pram from a friend of mine who left it with my next door neighbour. They moved away. We didn't think they wanted it anymore. So it got blown up, it's in there. And then there's a little note saying, we need our pram, we're just about to have twins. And they actually came to the opening, actually, you know, a couple of months ago to come and look at the shed to see if they could find their pram. So some of the army. I wanted them all to turn up at the opening in uniform, but they said they'd have to be in their civvies, which is a bit of a shame. There's some curlers from Walthamstow Boot Sale, and this book summed it all up. Still current, that. And then, because I knew I was going to show it here, and there was these 3 beautiful rooms, I thought, what can I do that's a companion piece? I wanted to make a companion piece to the shed. And I was been asked at the time if I wanted to make a piece for the First World War commemorations by the War Museum. So I went with the person who's organising the project to the poppy factory in Richmond, because I wanted to do something with poppies, and then I thought, oh, poppies, this is such a cliched thing, and I knew it was a real cliched thing, but I've always been interested in factories, and I just thought there must be something there, that there's some reason I wanted, everybody in Britain knows what the poppy is. I mean, it's actually exported to 80 different countries, anywhere where, British soldiers have fallen, they send poppies to. And I got to the factory, and when I saw this machine that cuts out the poppies and embosses them, and this big reel of red paper, I knew I wanted to use the paper. And the explosion piece, it fills a room with shadows, it's very dramatic, and this is the opposite. It's very quiet, and it's just the paper. It's just about the negative. It's just about the holes left by the poppies. So everybody wears the poppies, but it's almost like I was thinking about that song, where have all the flowers gone? They've all been picked one by one, So, and I've called it war room rather. War room's quite an active term. It just means it's still operational, and it is still operational. So it's not just for the 800th anniversary of the First World War. This is, because I decided to do it for here, not for the British, for the War Museum. I just thought, well, actually, this goes on year in, year out. The factories are manned all the year round. They're not, just for a couple of weeks a year to put, so they produce about between 50 and 60 million poppies, which are shipped off all over the place. And I suspended these. They're not, I like the idea of it being a double negative. So there's about 300,000 holes plus in that room. So, but that room, since then, the factory is still producing, and it could fill that room over and over and over again. And I was thinking about worldwide wars, and not necessarily only British Legion, but all the deaths from war. And I made a film, which I hope most of you might have seen, which is only 9 minutes long, which is called War Machine. So this is, there's a factory in Richmond which only makes about 1 million poppies a year, and they all make them by hand. It's not made by disabled people. And it's a place where people might go to see the poppies being made. But there is another factory in Aylesford which makes 50 million plus poppies a year, and that operates from 7 in the morning till 10 at night for 50 weeks of the year, and it just stops for 2 weeks for Christmas. So it's ongoing, and it's, there's 5 of these machines in this room, circular machines, and and there's these big reels, that look like film reels of red paper and green paper that feed into this machine. So it's almost like it's very beautiful. There's this rhythmic sound, and I just thought it was quite formal and modernist. So I decided I was going to make this film that was not about, it was going to have no people in it. It was just going to be still cameras and just focusing on the details of the machine. So the film is just charting the progress of these two lines, the thin red line and the thin green line through the machines. So it feeds in, and there's hoppers full of the stems. And in the film, you don't really realise at first what's being made. There's a kind of unfolds. And there's these little poignant, I love the moustache there. Mine was Sergeant Major. So I started to almost, it became a very anthropomorphic, whatever that is, that phrase. But there's some beautiful colours, and somehow you're seduced by the machine. And so they put all the heads on the poppies. And this hopper full of the poppy heads go round and round, and then in the film, occasionally it judders to a halt because they've got stuck in the machine, and someone will come as a stick and get it going again. When the machine stopped, I thought, well, we've got to have a 2-minute silence there, because I don't know if they stop the factory for 2-minute silence. I think they just carry on through. This is just almost like a machine you can't stop. And so I had the machine stopping, and then I went down to the cenotaph. So editing the film just happened to fall across November the 11th. I was supposed to have had the show open a month before here, but we got delayed. That's why this film got made, because I managed to squeeze in the making of this film. It wouldn't have got made before. And so I went down to the cenotaph, recorded the 2-minute silence. So you get the big band, you get the cannon going off, you get children crying, people coughing, you know, because silence is never really silent. And then after 2 minutes, the machine starts up again, but it goes backwards very briefly. And then the poppies get churned out. And then there's all these endless warehouses, which is like the end of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you get all the, you know, sort of Wootton Bassett sort of funereal sort of feeling to it. Okay, moving on. I'm not going to talk about every single drawing on the wall, don't worry, but this is I love the fact that we've got the old architecture as well as the new architecture, and that piece, the room you come into, which has got the low ceilings, and we always have these drawings and watercolours from the collection hung there, so they very graciously gave me a wall in there, so I thought I can't compete with Turner, Constable, you know, Blake and all the others. I'm out, you know, so I thought I'm going to stick every drawing ever made on the wall. No, this is just a sample of drawings. These are my wire drawings, which started in the mid-90s, when I had been suspending things on wires for some time, and I like the idea of, instead of suspending things on wires, I was going to make objects into the wire itself. So the first things I did that was with wedding rings. I had bought a couple of wedding rings from a pawn shop, and I melted them down and had them made into wire. And the wire, being gold, was very hard to handle. I thought I could manipulate it and do something with it, but it kept breaking. And I thought, oh dear, you know, this is. I wasn't married at the time. I thought this is what I'd do as a marriage, you know, be breaking up all the time. So I tied knots in the wire and put it, you know, and I put it between 2 sheets of glass, and that was my first wire drawing. It was called Wedding Ring Drawing, and then in brackets, Circumference of a Living Room. So that was the first one. And then there's this piece here, which is a silver dollar drawn into a wire, and that's called Measuring Liberty as a Dollar. So I had the wire made into the height of Statue of Liberty. So I like the idea of this. You don't get the dollar, you don't get the Statue of Liberty, but you get the measurement in between. And this is Measuring Niagara as a Teaspoon. So I started to get all my famous monuments that I loved, which I used to make all these little lead facsimiles of you know, little souvenirs you get of famous buildings. I used to make those in lead. So those are some of my early sculptures. So I was referencing these, you know, the idea of liberty, or Niagara, you know, the idea of going to Niagara Falls with a teaspoon and trying to measure it, you know, trying to measure the torrent. So man and nature always trying to do battle with each other. This is some of my bullet samplers. I'm not sure if this was influenced by coming here and seeing the textile department, but I was always a big fan of the textile department at the V&A, so I was always visiting that, and I always loved the backs of embroideries. So I started doing these little, almost like kills, you know, the little crosses. I'd pierce the paper with, I'd make a sort of tracing paper, and I'd go like this with a sort of a sharp point, and then I'd link up those points and make these crosses, and then that was a kind of Rorschach because I doubled it up, and then I'd put that onto a sheet of paper and I'd pierce through the paper, and then on these ones, these are double ones, so they're slightly out, you know, you get this weird crosshair thing going that you get in sights of guns, you know, that trying to get 2 images to snap together. And then when I looked at the back, which was really messy, I thought, well, I really like that. And I like that possibly more on the front. So, you know, so when I've done these, I've made them so you can take out the frame and have it either side. So these are my bullet samplers, going back to my grandfather talking about embroidering in the trenches in the First World War and knitting. And somehow I like this idea of making a bullet into something that goes through paper, but being shot through paper. It's been meticulously sewn, like suture-like. This is the bullet drawings in the collection of the Whitworth, which is one of my nets. I did a series of nets. I like the idea of the trajectory of the bullet becoming like something that could catch something. It could be a trap or a snare. And these are my crosshair drawings, which are made with bullets too, which I would sew them through grids. These are my poison and antidote drawings, which are made with, the black ink has got snake venom in it, and the white ink has got the antidote, the anti-venom in it. These came out of, I met my husband in Texas years ago, and they have a snake farm in Texas, and I have a horrible phobia of snakes. A lot of my work's about my fears, and I phoned them up and said, oh, could you milk some snakes for me? Could you give me some poison? And they said, oh, yes, no problem. You know, five snakes later, they gave me a pint of bright yellow snake venom, you know, which I could have killed, you know, anybody with. And it's, you know, I've diluted it into the ink, so and then I had to try and get the anti-venom, which was much more difficult. So I got to get a friendly doctor to prescribe it for me, which was quite hard, but I managed to find somebody prepared to prescribe me snake venom, which cost me a lot of money because snake venom is very expensive. And so the two together, you know, I like this idea that Rorschach blots are supposed to be abstract things. They're supposed to be things that, you know, psychoanalysts say you can look at, and what you see in them tells you a lot about your personality, but they've already loaded up with snake venom. You know, it's like the bullet drawing grids, you know, like minimalism was all about emptying out and not having any subject, but if you've got the grid made out of a bullet, it becomes something different. So I'm sort of playing around with that idea that you can give work content in a different kind of way. So the poison antidote I really like. I've occasionally given to my friends for wedding presents, which is always good, I think. It's a pile of cocaine, burnt, incinerated by the Customs and Excise, who I went to and asked them if I could have the object, all the stuff they got rid of, you know, because I was always interested in things that had been killed off in a way. And so I said, I've seen on the news that you incinerate all the drugs, because they always do it very visibly. You know, they have steamrollers going over Rolex watches, and they have guys standing in front of the big fires looking completely stoned. And so they gave me, they gave me chopped up pornographic videotape almost straight away. They said, oh, well, we chopped this videotape. This is quite a while ago. And I you dissolved that chopped up tape in solvent and made Rorschach blots. One of them's in the show, or a couple of them in the show. And then it took me working with them for quite a long time before they gave me drugs. I said, well, how is it you gave me pornography on the first day, but you took me, you know, what is it about the drugs that's different from the pornography? And they said, well, it's more potent as a symbol, which I thought was really interesting. And actually, some of the conversations I had with the Customs and Excise were some of the best sculptural workshops I've ever had. They would hold up a glass of water and say, where within this object is the space for concealment? You know, so they're a master of knowing where people hide things. So that, you know, might be cocaine that's been made into a liquid and put into bottles, and the only way they can tell it's liquid cocaine is by the weight of the bottle. They've even had people take vinyl records and split them along the edge and hollow out the inside and put cocaine in that and put that together again. Again, it's the weight of the crate. Or they've had people in African robes go through customs with the fabric of their clothing starched with cocaine, so very stiffly. So I loved all this. I mean, it's great. So we had a lovely conversation. So I kind of think I'm more of an oral artist, really. I like having conversations with people. That's why the university would be such a great place, because I find that much more inspiring, and I'll think about work differently if I'm talking to somebody who's not from the art world, because they talk about things in a different way, and it adjusts, you know, like the army, you know, we had some great conversations about sculptural practices, but, you know, they think, oh, she's a, you know, silly artist, but we'll help her, and I'm thinking, oh, vicious army. And so you've got your prejudices, but somehow you kind of, you know, you dismantle them and reassemble them, and so it's quite an exciting thing. Where was I? Better stop wittering on. Keep going. So talking about breathing and inhaling and exhaling, which is what I, you know, with my musical instruments, and I've made all kinds of works that have got like exhaled schoolhouse or inhaled wallpaper. But these are 3 balloons that I've got a collection of balloons, and the one over there is called Breath of a Librarian, because there was a very famous artist called Manzoni, who had Breath of an Artist, which was a balloon he blew up, and it is now kind of an empty balloon. He died at 29, but it seems to be quite poignant that these museums all have these shriveled balloons they're restoring all the time to hang on to his work. So I thought, oh, well, a librarian should, this is from a librarian's party at the British Library when it moved from the British Museum to where it is now. So they had this big party, and this was left at the end, so I thought, oh, I'm going to have that. And then the middle one is from Jeffrey Archer when he stood for mayor. It didn't get inflated because we all know what happened. He went to prison and didn't end up running for mayor. So that one's called Breath of a Politician. And the final one is called Breath of a Scotsman. That's from last year's, Scottish nationalist attempt to be its own country. So it's an ongoing series, this. My embryo firearms from the Colt Firearms Factory in Connecticut. So these are guns in the earliest stage of production. So these are would have been Colt 45 guns if they'd carried on through the process. But I asked them if I could have a couple of their guns at this point and give them the finish. They'd given a finished gun. So these pieces are called embryo firearms. And that was a very interesting opening later when the guys from the factory came to the exhibition. And they were all National Rifle Association card-carrying guys, and were very pro-gun. And so lots of people who were there were anti-gun. So there was lots of great discussions, which was always good. And this is a piece I made this year through the wonderful Manchester University Engineering Department. They precipitated the gun. This is the gun that was confiscated by the police here. It's obviously been involved in a crime, and it's been decommissioned. And then it's been precipitated, which means it's been put in acid and made it gradually dissolved and made into a pile of rust. And it's laid out in a line in front of the embryo firearms. The police also gave me this gun, which is a sawn-off shotgun used in a robbery. And they decommissioned it for me. So they said, we'll cut it up for you, and then you can do what you like with it. So they chopped it into bits. And I thought, well, I like the bits. And I love the fact it was a sawn-off shotgun to begin with. So I've called this sawn-up, sawn-off shotgun. So it's been sawn up by the police and sawn off by the criminals. So there's a quite nice sculptural arrangement there. This piece is called Room for Margins, which is from the backs of Turners from the Tate collection. Before I did the KISS piece, I'd already been pestering them in the painting department, in the conservation department, and I was interested in all kinds of things there. The varnishes, they took old famous old paintings, and could I have the cotton buds, they'd got the varnish on it, and I was going through their drawers, and I came across these pieces of canvas. I said, wow, these are beautiful, they're like Rothko's. And they said, oh yes, they're the backs of Turner paintings. They were double stretched, and we had to re-stretch them because they're too brittle, so we put new canvases, and these are, I thought, what's going to happen to them? They said, oh, we're going to cut them up and try varnishes out on them because they're an example of 150-year-old canvas. And I was going, oh, can I borrow them for an exhibition? So I borrowed them for a show in 1998 at the Serpentine. I framed them up, and I gave them the titles of the Turner paintings they were the back of. And you get the stretcher mark, the bar, and they also get they all got stain at the bottom. I said, what's the stain at the bottom? They said, that's from when the Thames flooded the Tate. So there's a line for all the works. So, it's either rough sea with wreckage or Venice at sunset. These are bits of the margins of the canvas that they threw away, and I thought, well, Turner painted these, they shouldn't be thrown away, and so there's one from Panama Canal, another rough sea, and then they blotted all he did all those beautiful drawings, Turner, they blotted them with blotting paper, all these soaked, flood damaged drawings, and they got all these offsets, which were very kind of abstract, but really beautiful. But they're not going to do anything with them. They didn't really show them. And I thought, well, could I, show a few of those as well? So I made this selection and asked if, and it was shown as Room for Margins. And then there was a tour of my work going to America, and I thought, well, how can I get these to be shown again? So I had wrote very cheekily to Nick Sirotto, the director of the Tate, and said, could you reacquisition these as examples of my work rather than Turner? And so there's a big wrangling going on between the departments about whether this could be taken out of that department and put in this department, and all the politics of the Tate were all whirring away. And I've got to ask them about the KISS next. On this wall is The Ancient of Days by Blake, there's some of the offsets, which are, there's Turner and Constable, which goes on to the last little bit, which is about my collaboration with Kostya Novoselov, who's your wonderful Nobel Prize-winning inventor of graphene, along with Andrew Geim. And one of the pleasures of being working on this project is, because I'm such a nosy person, you know, I was asking Maria, you know, oh, I'd love to meet, you know, Kostya, you know, because I've been reading about graphene for years because it's made out of graphite, and I've always got an interest in drawing, but also got a big interest in new materials and new energy sources because I'm, you know, like all of you, really worried about the planet. And so meeting Kostya, you know, I asked him if he could possibly make graphene from old master drawings in the Whitworth collection, and he was suddenly very excited. So, oh yes, I think I could, you know. So he came here with a microscope and looked at all these drawings in the collection and extracted little stray flakes of graphite, you know, nothing that a conservator wouldn't remove anyway because they don't like stray bits of graphite. And then he made graphene out of them. I said, well, what can we do with them? You know, how can we activate this graphene? Sorry. So we've got. He wrote out all the names of the people who. Rutherford, who split the atom in Manchester. He's got a letter he wrote in pencil. So off his signature, he made a piece of graphene. So I said, can we make a trigger out of it? Can it be made into some kind of switch? Because I knew I was going to do this firework display with a meteorite in it, so I really, you know, I wanted to make a Blakean firework display. And so that's why I was particularly interested in Blake. He goes, oh yes, I think, yes, it's very sensitive actually. I said, well, what would activate it? And he said, oh, a breath would do it. So I thought, oh, a breath. So like my breath of an artist and breath of a politician. So it's breath of a scientist, physicist. So this is Kostya on the night, poor man. I didn't realize how much pressure I was putting him under. So he made this sensor, which when he breathed on it, it triggered this meteor landing. So it was science and nature and man controlling nature. You know, so can you control a meteor fall or a hurricane and I think Blake in his poetry tried to do that. You know, he was a visionary. He was very interested in the elements. And so this is the display. So if you were there in the night, you would have seen it. And so this Blakean abstract happened. And then there should be a sign somewhere. Is it in the park yet? No? This is a sign. I made a series of moon landings and meteorite falls over the years. And I had a National Trust, guys who make the signs for National Trust. The National Trust sign, you know, is silver with black lettering and it's got an oak leaf. And so I asked them for the moon landings. I said, could you make a nighttime version of it? Could you make a black one with a moon on it? And so I'd send up a piece of moon rock in a fire display, like a nocturne. And so this is a meteor fall. So this is for the park. And it's all true, because a meteorite did land, and it is lost, because it's been made into very small pieces, so you won't find it. I did a moon landing up in Scotland about 3 years ago at the sculpture park up there, and for the opening of the sculpture park. And kids, when they see this sign about the meteorite being lost, the moon rock being lost, they were finding pieces of rock and taking them and saying, is this the moon? so in the shop there, they've got a whole collection of rocks that kids have brought saying, is this the moon? And that's it. I've whittled on too long.
So the thing is, you never go on too long. You were exactly on time. And actually, I know all of us could have heard you talk for another half an hour, which is good because we've got some time for questions.
Yes.
So I've got about 20 minutes to take questions from the floor. We've got some microphones, so if you'd like to ask a question, please put up your hand and wait for the mic, because otherwise Connie won't be able to hear you properly and we won't be able to record your question properly. So first question from any part of the audience.
There's one over there.
Over here, thank you.
No.
I just wanted to know why you called your piece Cold Dark Matter.
Oh, well, when I made that piece, there was a brand new scientific term about matter in the universe that they knew existed, but they couldn't see it. They knew it existed through all its effect on other things. So they called it cold dark matter. And I thought that was a really quite, scientists always come up with these wonderful titles for things. So I thought, and most of my titles are found objects. They're things I cull from newspapers or when I'm reading a book or I hear a phrase and I just collect it. And the other part of the title, which is an exploded view. So it's all about matter that they knew existed but they couldn't quantify it. And then exploded view is the opposite. It's like a diagram in a car manual where you label everything so you know how to put it back together again. So it's me trying to formalize an explosion, something unquantifiable and uncontrollable, by trying to formalize it, which is what I try to do in the piece.
Next question.
This one here.
Fantastic.
Cheers. Hi, I was just wondering, since the very start of your career, you've been suspending objects, and why have you done it, and has the methodology of suspending objects always been the same throughout your career, or has it changed in any way?
I think I started suspending objects I think because of Gaudi. Don't know if you know Gaudi, the architect from Barcelona. He made these wonderful architectural models where he suspended bags of lead weight from the ceiling to work out the stress and strains of his buildings. He had all these kind of cables that he'd put a weight every so often just to try something out in space. And I think when I started making sculpture, the reason I didn't start making sculpture at the beginning because I thought it was all heavy lumps on plinths, and then I discovered Arta Povera and Piero Manzoni and Yves Klein and all these artists who were making dematerializing objects and making things ephemeral. And suspending things for me, because I've got a very bad fear of heights and I get vertigo, I'm always trying to almost recreate that feeling, because I don't think a lump, on the earth doesn't, which sculpture for me had been. I just thought it doesn't describe how I feel about the world. I think we're all in kind of limbo. We're all kind of, moving around. Things are in flux. Things aren't fixed. So I was trying to make something non-fixed. So even if I'm, even with the crack pieces, which are more earthbound, they're still hovering. They're not, they're not on a plinth. They're just hovering. So I think it's part of a sensibility. I love Monet, for example. Monet didn't want anything to be fixed. Turner, towards the end of his life, was getting more and less, less and less fixed. So I think it's something. I think it's part of the human condition, really. So it's the opposite of being earthbound.
Next question. Just in the middle back there.
It's not a very fine art question.
That's all right.
You seem to have developed a sort of parallel. You've got two lives of an artist, and you've developed a fine art of persuading people to give you stuff.
Well,
is there some art waiting with things you haven't been able to get hold of? Has anybody refused you?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
lots. NASA refused. I'm still working on them.
There are things still to come then.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think perhaps my father was, a smallholder, and we lived in the country, and he was a real barterer. He'd swap a shovel for, a year's worth of meat from the butchers or whatever. So he was a bit of a wheeler dealer, and I think perhaps I've inherited that part of, So I think this thing about me being an oral artist. I think I do love the getting my hands on things that are hard to get hold of, but I think it's a two-way process. There's creativity happens between two things. So, and I think sculpture traditionally is about friction. The friction of hitting a hammer on stone or forging metal. But the idea of friction in a more, talking to the National Rifle Association or the British Army is different, and that's a thing to negotiate, and the work is made out of that negotiation. So yes, very often people say no. I'm working on trying to get a royal to do my embroider my Magna Carta and embroidery, and I'm finding it really hard. I think perhaps they think the original Magna Carta was anti-royal, and that whoever embroiders might be, you know, the King John character. But I'm still working on it. I've only got a week to go, but I've had a polite no from the Queen and Prince Charles so far, but I'm still hopeful.
Well, I think that demonstrates something else I think that I've noticed about you, which is you don't give up easily. But it also is a very nice point to introduce Mary Griffiths, who will just stand up for a moment. So Mary is the curator of the exhibition Connie has made, but she's also been the fellow traveller. And so a typical Tuesday might be, I ring Mary and she says, yes, I can talk for a minute, we're just on the way to Salford to get a gun. And that actually, Connie, you explained it very well, but you didn't explain sometimes just how hard it is and how far and how very politely you are willing to take people, whether it's ferrying Mary off or helping or encouraging Mary to open doors for you.
Yes, but Mary is at the moment making a beautiful drawing for the National Graphene Centre down the road, because Mary makes beautiful graphite drawings. So she, you know, she's the official graphene artist, really.
You'll notice there's a lot of graphite around all of this, really.
Yes, we were inspecting fingernails earlier about how much graphene or graphite we got onto our fingernails, and I was explaining I once had explosive Semtex under my fingernails. Not to brag or anything, but Mary's, you know, been fantastic actually, because that's the unsung hero really, because there's an awful lot of curators I've worked with over the years. I mean, Jonathan Watkins, who wrote for the catalogue, who helped me with my Exploded Shed and wrapping up Rodin's The Kiss, and I went to Jerusalem with. You know, we've been on many journeys together, and he, as a curator, loves the thrill of the chase as much as I do, so we were partners in crime. And I think that's really important in a curator, that they help you do something that's quite very difficult to do. So there's all kinds of skills needed. And Mary's got much better diplomatic skills than me. I can sometimes open my mouth.
I think both of you have those. But we did learn some quite remarkable things about the university in the course of this, and not just the academics that wanted to work with Cornelia and Mary. It's also that Mary was able to get poison quite easily via the university's procurement system, which, given how difficult it sometimes is to work with procurement, is some feat. But of course, a university is full of people who have to work with deadly things all the time. So certain kinds of conversations are easier here than they would be in other parts of the world.
Yes, you helped me get the ingredients of gunpowder, didn't you? Which I still got to. I made some explosion drawings years ago using the three pigments: the white, saltpeter, yellow sulphur, and black charcoal. And I made these rather explosive-looking drawings. And I wanted to make some more minimal ones, but I hadn't got those materials anymore because I got them through the Science Museum. But Manchester University and Mary managed to procure me that. But don't tell anybody because I might be arrested.
So another question from the floor.
There's one here.
I was just wondering if... Oh, sorry.
It's all right, don't
No,
worry.
that's fine.
That's fine.
Then we'll come forward.
That's right, you do it first.
I was wondering if there was anyone you were looking forward to collaborating with within the university when you've got access to all the different areas.
Oh, well, I think I want to explore the engineering department more. I've heard that if you spin a piece of paper very fast, it can cut through anything. So I quite like. I don't know if anybody here can spin something very fast for me. So yes, I think I'm going to be. I'm hoping that the engineering is something I'm going to get more involved with, and carry on working with Kostya, because we do have Rutherford's graphene, which we might be able to use. Oh yes, I want to use electron microscopes here, which would be very exciting. So yes, I think there's going to be lots of things. I'm going to organise sit-ins with the students about global warming as well.
Very good.
When you mentioned being true to materials, what did you mean?
When I was
Being true to materials, which was the title of the talk as well. What
Yeah.
do you mean? What's your personal...
Well, I think there's a material, there's a literal material, that, you know, like a bullet, and then you think, well, a bullet's made of lead, and because it's made of lead, it's pliable, and it can stretch, and, you know, and they're using in munitions because it's heavy and it, you know, can kill someone. But if you shoot a candle through a gun, that could kill you too. You know, I did a piece where I shot a pearl necklace into a suit, and it made pretty nasty holes. So really, anything with the right force behind it. But the bullet has got such a bubble around it. Everybody knows what a bullet is, and they all know it has a trajectory, and it all knows it can be fatal. But the idea of taking all that bubble of knowledge and the material, and then using that as a material, and then using the bullet itself to make a grid, or, you know, make a sampler, which is a very female thing, for example. That's quite interesting. So I'm being true to the material because I'm being true to what it is. Like if it's a silver teapot, for example, it's got all its own cultural baggage that goes with the teapot. And it's made of silver, which I love, and it can tarnish. And I noticed everything's tarnishing nicely in the show. And it's got all these connotations. But then if you squash that, then it has a different connotation. You know, so I think I'm trying to explore the material in all kinds of ways and be true to it in all kinds of ways, but not just about its materiality, but about its place in culture as well.
There you go.
Maybe people are also a material you're trying to be true to, in a way. I'm talking about all the collaborations that you have, and a lot of times they seem to be of a healing nature, let's say with prisoners embroidering, doing embroidery, or the British Army exploding something for pacifist purposes. Was there a point in your career when you thought, my work is about the process, and let's say a few things you could have done yourself, for example, shooting the pearls through a suit, but you intentionally asked someone to do that. So where is that line between the work being about interacting with people and helping them heal, and actually the final conceptual project?
I've shot a gun once. I went to a gun club and shot a Magnum 44, the most powerful handgun in the world, which is what they gave me to you know, initiate me. They're these big British guys, and it almost ripped my arm off, and I didn't manage to hit the target once. You know? So I didn't really want to ever shoot one again. So it was great to have some good firearms guys to you know, the irony of them shooting a pearl necklace through a suit. You know, they were great. They was going, do you want it through the back or the front? There was lots of humour going down, you know, because they think it's faintly ridiculous, and you know, it is preposterous quite often, some of the things we get up to, but it's fun, you know. I think it's important it's fun too, because there's a tragic comedy that goes down, I think, in the work, and which I really like having. You know, one of my favourite playwrights is Beckett, and he's incredibly funny. If he's directed right, he can be hysterically funny. There's so much pathos there. And so I like that kind of black humour. So I think for me, it's far more interesting for me than sitting, you know, I can't shoot a gun, I haven't got a firearms licence, you know, I haven't got a desire to do it. And it's much more interesting for a National Rifle Association guy who loves shooting to do it rather than me. And it's something, I'm not pro-gun, you know, but we can have discussions. So that means I can have a good discussion with somebody who loves guns, and I can talk about not liking them. And so, but they quite enjoy that too. So I think most people like a bit of, I don't know, you know, takes them out of what they're doing every day, and takes me out of the studio, which is where I don't want to be, because that seems too much like hard work. I was talking to somebody earlier about my childhood being spent doing hard work all the time, and my father made me feel guilty for playing because we had a small holding, and I just spent it working. And so if I did disappear off the fields and have a bit of playtime, it was always felt guilty for doing it. And somehow they've still got that guilt with making art. You know, it's somehow an illicit thing. So I can't, unpick that. So I go with the flow on it.
We've got a question over here.
Thanks. I was wondering if drawing or sketching in a sort of traditional sense plays any part in your practice when you're, for instance, elaborating an artwork or, developing an idea in the direction of an artwork.
Well, I used to be able to draw photographically when I was 18, and I can't do that now. I mean, I can make notes in the book and make a few little bad drawings, but I've somehow, I sort of, once I mastered the art of drawing photographically, I kind of lost interest in it. It was so funny, because I did this drawing of a lapwing, a stuffed lapwing, which is in the book, my monograph on my work. But I did it at 18 and at art school, and it was very stiff, and I did every hair and feather on it. And my parents loved it. They framed it up, had it on the walls, and oh, it's great. You've never done anything better than that. And when I got nominated for the Turner Prize, they said, "Do you want that drawing for the show?" I wish I should have put it in, actually. And then they died a few years ago, and I inherited it back, and my daughter saw it. She goes, "Mom, you can draw." So she thinks that that's what I should be doing too. And then so she dashed off some very, she was about 7 or 8 at the time. She dashed off some quick sketches based on my drawing, and they got neater and neater, because she was trying to copy mine, because she thought it was so good. And I thought, well, actually the first ones were really great when you just did it very quickly. It's these later ones are not so good. And I gave a talk at the Prince's Drawing School in London 2 or 3 years ago, and I started my lecture with that drawing, and we discussed drawing a lot, about what drawing is. And I suppose I've disappeared onto these other drawings. So I make little diagrams and little sketches, but they're nothing that I could write home about. It's almost like I'm avoiding anything that looks too much like art.
There's a question here in the red shirt.
You began to answer my question one question ago. Do you see an explicit role for humour in art or in your art?
Explicit role?
For humour.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I think
And could
so.
you say a bit about how you see its role, how you see what the role of humour is?
Oh, well, I think humour is really important, obviously, for everyone in humanity. If there's tragedy, there has to be humour, and some of the best, Dostoevsky or best writers, even if they're talking about dark things, there's humour there. And so, I think for me, humour is very important, and hopefully, perhaps the humour doesn't come through in the work, but perhaps there's a lot of humour in the process.
No, for me, it comes through hugely in the work, but also there's this thing about the lightness of your politics equaling the strength and depth of them. And that in the work, I think things are very often presented very lightly, without any shouting, but with a really kind of dry humour and serious politics behind them. And that to me is just much more effective than the direct approach. And it makes me think of the kind of Emily Dickinson looking at things slant.
Yes.
And so the politics emerges when you look at your work for a little while. It doesn't kind of smack you on the face and make its obvious point too quickly. And that's one of the things I most appreciate about it. And the humour in the darkness, for me, has been there from the beginning. Because I find the easiest way to start to talk about cold, dark matter is to get people to think about Wile E. Coyote.
Yes.
And those moments that nearly everybody saw those cartoons growing up, and
Yes.
the moment where you get to look at his kind of slow realisation of that, oh shit.
When he's halfway off the cliff.
Yeah.
So I've copied a lot of those tragic moments from cartoons in my work, so steamrolling things, things going off cliffs, things being blown up, things being washed away. So I think I'm quite like that, and I suppose that my love of cliches is also there. You know that you know it's you know there's a certain yes, I think almost like a pop cliche there as well.
But I mentioned politics because I wanted just to ask you to say a bit more about the fracking and environmental issues that you've been preoccupied with. Because we spent some time at an evening at the Friends Meeting House in Manchester when Connie was installing the show as part of the debates about whether there should or shouldn't be fracking in Lancashire. And the people of Lancashire were quite vitriolically opposed.
Yeah, and I think we don't need to do that. I think what we actually Anthony Gormley, myself, and Lord Stern, Nicholas Stern, and Mike Perry, who's a photographer, we've got together as a little group, and we've written a proposal about redesigning Britain, or a design-led green Britain industrial revolution, a new industrial revolution, which we presented to George Osborne in January, and I think he incorporated a tiny bit of it into his. We've sent it out to all the other politicians too, and because I think in this election, what we're not discussing is climate change. We talk about immigration, we talk about education, and the NHS. All those things will be hugely affected by climate change, which is rapidly coming on us. And scientists have been saying this for a long time, and the politicians aren't listening. And there's a big meet happening in Paris in the end of this year, which really, us, the public, should be asking all the politicians who are up for election to what their proposal is to try and turn this ship around. But they're not. It's not on their radar. It's not on their agenda. I remember when we went to George Osborne with our proposal, which is about a new industrial revolution. But we have the best architects. We have some great designers. Jonathan Ive went off to revolutionise Apple. Richard Rogers and Norman Foster, both very green architects, are building green cities in China. We've got graphene, which every country in the world are fighting over for patents, which could revolutionise energy consumption and batteries and all the rest of it. And what are we doing? We're thinking about fracking, which has already proved to be disastrous in America. Huge amounts of, I think 50% of the gas they've fracked in America has been burnt off into the atmosphere, which is not been written about. But, and I remember talking to, we had George Osborne's ear for a little while, and he said, "Oh, but people aren't interested in this." I said, "Well, you should make them interested. You've got children, I've got children. The media dictates what people are interested in, and really, we're barking up the wrong tree if we're talking about, the NHS or all those things are important. But the reason that they're going to get more and more stretched, and what's happening in all these poor refugees are getting drowning, but they're leaving because there's wars. Wars are very often to do with resources, and those resources are going to get less and less as time progresses. So we're going to have more and more immigration and more and more people needing to move, because California is in terrible drought. Some homes are having to shut up shop because there's no groundwater for them to have. So, and we're just fiddling while the boat goes down, or Rome burns, so we got the metaphors mixed up. But, so anyway, so this proposal, which I think is a very good proposal, and Nick Stern, who was employed by Gordon Brown to do an assessment of what climate change will cost us if we do something now versus doing something when it's too late. He's an economist, but it opened up his eyes after talking to scientists. He became very alarmed indeed, and he's written brilliantly. He's helped us shape this manifesto, which we will, the election's going on, and we've been trying to get that into the election, but it's not quite succeeded. But whoever gets in power, I think people should be hanging from the rooftops screaming, especially students, because it's their life that's been, the people, actually Manchester, they said in the surveys, is one of the places where the least amount of people vote. especially the student population from 19 to 24. They're not voting, and they need to vote. You know, at least certain parties are looking at it more than other parties. But we really need to make it the agenda, and it looks like the politicians are not bothering with it for whatever reason, because it's not economic or it's not going to make them enough money. But other countries are going to do it if we're not going to do it, and we'll be left behind. We'll be investing in stuff that's been tried and tested elsewhere, and they've moved on. So we used to lead the world, but we're not anymore.
Well, we've almost got to close. I'd be happy to take one final question.
Hello. You're obviously very passionate about climate change. Do you never feel the need to really express that directly through your artwork? Your artwork seems to be very separate from your political ideology.
Well, there's a piece in the show called Chomsky in Abstract, which is a 40-minute interview with Noam Chomsky about climate change, which is a very direct, most polemical piece I've ever done. I actually think I made that in, what was it, 2007? And actually Chomsky, I'm not saying that I turned him onto it, he wasn't talking about climate change then, but he certainly is now. I mean, he's been very vocal, and Naomi Klein is very vocal, and she is a good colleague of Noam Chomsky. But I think we need more than those people to talk about it. We need everybody to talk about it. Well, we all, you know, people invite, you know, we all consume gas and electricity, but we've not been given any option, really. There is lots of options out there. Move all those fuel subsidies. The head of the World Bank has just said all the subsidies going to fossil fuels should be moved to renewables. You know, business and industry have wanted this to happen for a long time, but it's all to do with lobbyists. It's all to do with, you know, especially in America, you know, the oil industry running the government because they're very powerful.
I've got... Yeah. All right.
Sorry.
Mary's reminding me to say, but I have my notes, it's fine. I think that's a really good point to end on, because when we talked, we had a conversation on the opening weekend of the Whitworth, and the thing that you said was that everybody in the room could make a difference in this agenda if you just changed your energy supplier to a completely renewable one. So
Yes.
I will say that again in Connie's name, because I think what sits in your work, whether it's about that subject or not, is the incitement to do something.
And everybody can do it very overnight. It's not very, I mean, you must be fine. Your own energy provider has got a separate bit, which is renewable. But a good 100% renewable company is called Good Energy, which I've been using for the last 10 years. And they've won numerous Which polls as being the best energy provider. They're not more expensive than any of the others. In fact, they're cheaper in the big six. So there's no reason not to change, and it's very quick to change. But I think that's what everybody does. If every single person in the country did that tomorrow, we'd be in a very different place. It's a very simple thing you can do, because that means that they have to supply 100% renewables. So more money will shift away from fossil fuels to renewables. It's a very simple thing. I mean, really, you know, if anybody's got kids, it's the least you can do for them.
So it's the beginning of 3 years, and that's our challenge to take up. What will each of us do? I want to thank you hugely. Don't clap yet, I've got more thanks. Thanks first, and it will be last to Cornelia. But I also wanted to thank Jeremy Gregory, James Thompson and Mark Crinson from the Schools of Art, Language and Cultures, who have worked with us to make the honorary professorship possible. I wanted to thank Mary Griffiths again, who has worked on this throughout. Frith Street Gallery, who are Cornelia's gallery, who've been hugely supportive in realising the exhibition. And finally, I wanted to point you to the back of the room. There are catalogues for Cornelia's exhibition on sale, and even more wonderfully, limited edition print, which tonight only is £50 off. So take home a piece of Cornelia as well as her thoughts.
And the funds from that print are split between the British Legion and the Whitworth. So if you did buy one, it would be supporting both of those people.
In fact, British Legion, the Whitworth and the Poppy Factory.
Oh,
so
yes,
it all comes together. So go and take yourself a bit of Cornelia home. But thank you all for coming, and thank you again, Connie. It's been a fantastic talk.